There are two rules to alchemy in Fullmetal Alchemist. The first rule is the law of equivalent exchange. Only the same amount and the same type of material can be reassembled. The second rule is a taboo. An alchemist can never perform human transmutation. You cannot exchange raw material for the value of a soul. Any attempt to do so would be playing God. When Edward and Alphonse try and do this, they fail, and Edward's consciousness is transported to another dimension. He's transported to an ethereal white void and is greeted by an entity named Truth. This Truth entity is the force behind all alchemy. The truth behind alchemy is not just a matter of manipulating physical matter, but rather a deeper understanding of the underlying principles that govern the universe. How we see and relate to the universe as a society has largely changed over the course of time, by and large due to our relationship with technology. Novel technologies have been criticized since the dawn of time, but there is something distinct about our relationship with technology that has changed since around the industrial era. I believe that the contemporary critique of certain technologies takes on a different hue than the criticisms of the past. The modern critique of technology is different in kind to the previous critiques. People have criticized the proliferation of the automobile and even books back when those became widespread. However, these critiques are characteristically different from the modern critiques of our novel technologies. For example, you'll be hard-pressed to think of pre-modern works of poetry, literature, or song that express society-wide infatuation with technology. You'll be hard-pressed to find great medieval works talking about how the invention of the iron stirrup or horse collar will take over the world. Our intellectual and emotional relationship with technology, both our wild optimism about the prospects of human progress and our profound terror about the imminent apocalypse that this same technology might bring about, are products unique to modern times. The chief difference between pre-industrial and post-industrial technology is that pre-industrial technologies were made to help us live in accord to our nature. Post-industrial technologies are made to help us transcend our nature. This is why we worry about AI or ChatGPT controlling us when no such critique existed for the invention of the wheel or the proliferation of rubber. Over the past few decades, several blockbuster films have depicted the apocalypse as the result of uncontrollable forces that humans valiantly combated. Said uncontrollable force is often a piece of technology that we created. Most examples of this recent genre seem to reflect a widespread foreboding about a shared sense of powerlessness and even potential new kind of bondage to the very technology that was supposed to liberate us in the first place. These movies and programs portray how our optimistic and hubristic belief in our technology will usher in a new age of freedom. Yet undergirding it all, we do understand that there are various ways that we can be subjects to these very technologies. We see technology as something that will fundamentally change our lives. Far from controlling our technology to our own betterment, we find the technology ends up either ruling us or destroying us. This reminds me of something I read from the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor. In his book, A Secular Age, he offers a major analysis of the way modern societies think. His work reminded me of the Greek philosophical terms mimesis and poiesis. These views summarize the two different ways man can view his relationship to nature. A mimetic view regards the world as having a given order and meaning, and thus sees humans as creatures required to discover that meaning and conform themselves to it. Poiesis, by contrast, sees the world as a collection of raw material of which we can infinitely construe to our liking. At the beginning of the series, Edward sees the world as something that is primarily poietic, which is why even after seeing the truth, he comes out thinking that everything in the world is possible with alchemy. If there is an apparent impossibility, it's merely due to a misstep in the equation. This is why Ed believes that he can determine truth for himself. But this is not how the world works. While there are facets of nature that we can contain, we have yet to completely usurp nature. In the pre-industrialization era, this fact was much more obvious. Say you were a farmer in this era. Your life was utterly dependent on geography and the seasons. You would plow up the ground, scatter your seed, but ultimately you had no control over the weather, minimal control over the soil, and comparatively little control over whether your endeavors would succeed. That might well have meant for many that they had no control over life and death. They were entirely at the mercy of the environment. In such a world, the authority of nature was clear, obvious, and unavoidable. Compare that to now where, thanks to the car and airplane, global travel is no longer a matter of possibility but a matter of time. Or consider the way that communication has changed. If I were to immigrate somewhere back in the 1850s or so, I will be saying goodbye to everyone I know, possibly for the rest of my life. But now we can not only talk to them, but we're able to virtually see them thanks to video calls. This, of course, isn't to say that modern technology is bad in itself. There's obviously a lot of positives to this. This does help explain, however, why our world is very quick to see the world in a poietic manner as opposed to having inherent and natural functions in which we must conform ourselves to. This may explain why Ed believes that life itself is just a natural sequence of chemicals. I believe that his mastery of alchemy is an analog to our development of novel technologies. As far as Ed is concerned, the human experience is a collection of twitches, muscle movements, chemicals, and reactions. Such is partly the case, but in the final analysis, this only reveals a rudimentary understanding of humans. Such an attempt at anthropology couldn't even pass for explaining the makeup of an animal, let alone a human. We have no power over life and death. We cannot create complex life from non-life, and we cannot live forever. We only have methods of prolonging the life we have, which we have created through natural means. Even theoretical propositions of uploading and downloading our consciousness are really just fun science ideas. Such propositions have been heavily criticized by contemporary philosophers. Even the bonds that I mentioned before aren't the same online. The friendships that we create online are bland simulacrums of the real, authentic, personal relationships only possible in real life. In-person friendships transcend the mere physical and delve into something ethereal and transcendent. I explain such in my Hunter x Hunter video on friendship. This is also why romantic relationships can only be virtually maintained. Such relationships cannot have their foundation be virtual. Everyone agrees that only periphery maintenance of the relationship can be done virtually. Thus, we should use technology to try and aid our nature, not usurp it. It is best to try and harness nature and use it to our benefit as opposed to try and bend it to our will. We should work in alignment with truth, not against it. Ed fundamentally misunderstands how the world works. There are some things that cannot be bought. A human isn't just a collection of body parts smacked together, but they have an immaterial soul which cannot be quantified. For Ed's overreach, he's punished with learning the truth and losing a leg. A reminder that no matter how hard he tries, he should never step up and try and act like God and usurp nature. This is similar to Adam and Eve once they ate the forbidden fruit. It's said that they were made privy to the knowledge of good and evil and are cursed to surely die. In Genesis 3, we get Satan tempting Eve by saying, "For God knows that the day you eat it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." In the Bible, in Fullmetal Alchemist, and dare I say in modern times, there is a higher order of nature that cannot be fundamentally usurped. Ed's beginnings are similar to Father or the dwarf in the flask. Although it's only hinted, I'm going to assume that Father was part of the existence within the gate. The gate itself contains all these black hands and eyes similar to Father. The eyes and hands resemble the dwarf, or perhaps more accurately, the dwarf resembles the eyes and the hands, only he is a lesser, ersatz version of it. This is similar to how Satan was once one of God's best angels and ultimately descended unceremoniously to hell due to his pride. Notice also how gluttony has a fake door of truth. Note how the eye takes after the dwarf's eye, not the genuine eye of truth. It lacks its outwardly expanding iris characteristic of the real truth. This is because the dwarf is a cheap imitation of the truth, a crude attempt at copying God's power. In the beginning, the dwarf is stuck in his flask and unable to exist outside of his container. For this reason, he made it his goal to attain all power and transcend everything he despised about being in that flask. He is the ultimate embodiment of pride and the desire to overthrow nature. His ultimate goal is to be free of all the laws of the universe, to become and overthrow truth as Satan tried to become and overthrow God.
Join me. Yes, I will no longer be bound to you or your consequences. I'll force you down to this earth and into my mold. You have no choice but to be absorbed.
Viveni universum venus vici is a Latin phrase meaning, by the power of truth, I, while living, have conquered the universe. This is vanity. Truth is a constant reminder that no matter how clever or intelligent we become, we cannot conquer the universe. We can only live as a part of it. This all reminds me of CS Lewis and Soren Kierkegaard's depiction of sin and hell. According to Kierkegaard, sin isn't merely breaking God's law, but it is building your identity on something dissociated from God. In his book Sickness Unto Death, he says sin is the opposite of willing to be itself grounded transparently in God. I like this definition because it makes sense of the Bible's insistence on not merely following the letter of the law, but authentically living closer to God and being small reflections of Him. We don't earn our salvation through moral performance. Our salvation is accepted through committing our lives to authentically being in relation to God. The moral laws that He gives us are a means to that end, not the end in itself. Piggybacking off that idea, in The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis depicts hell as a sort of natural reality of our choosing from rejecting God, and by extension rejecting truth. Hell in the Bible is famously depicted as a fiery furnace, but it is also depicted as a place of darkness. Because sin is loving something more than God and building your identity around it, so too is your hell. In hell, whatever you loved more than God will become your God, and you will live for that in hell. And this hell will consume you like some kind of addiction. A fire, if you will. We all know people who are addicted to things and don't want anyone to get into it. We also know that they themselves keep descending further into that addiction. That is how C.S. Lewis sees hell. There's a much more comprehensive video by Inspiring Philosophy if you want a more in-depth take on this idea. If you use truth as a metaphor for God, as God calls himself the truth in John 14:6, then this makes sense of how truth interacts with all of the people who try to usurp nature and delve into the taboo topic of human transmutation. Izumi, Ed and Al's mentor, tried to bring her stillborn child back from the dead. When she enters the white void, truth takes on a more feminine appearance, showing that truth occupies whatever appearance the user takes. As a punishment for her trespassing, she lost her reproductive organs, making it impossible for her to ever bear a child again. Although by force, Mustang also appears at the gate. The man who always looked to create a shiny new age for Amestris had his eyesight taken away from him. Truth ensured that whatever the good colonel did, he would never be able to see what he helped create. This is similar to the depiction of hell and sin by C.S. Lewis and Soren Kierkegaard. Because there's no afterlife that we explore, and there's no benevolent god in Fullmetal Alchemist, this is the closest substitute that they could hope for. Where C.S. Lewis describes hell as something within you that slowly consumes you, truth is taking something neutral or even good. Philosophically, this is a very good substitute. To C.S. Lewis, hell is something substandard within you that burns over time and consumes you. You choose that thing instead of the ultimate good, which would be being in association with God. As I've mentioned, sin is dissociating yourself from God. So similarly, Izumi, by trying to usurp nature, by trying to usurp truth, is pulling herself away from truth. Through Izumi and Mustang, we also see how hell is having something that you really want that you are now deprived of. Izumi specifically tried to make that her ultimate thing, and now she's deprived of it. She tried to play God with it. Being deprived of that thing, for them, is living in hell. Truth speaks differently to different people who enter the void. When he meets Mustang, who is forced to enter the void, he doesn't say anything because there's nothing to teach him. Mustang tried to live where he was situated within nature. He was only forced to enter the void against his will. When Ed enters the void and asks the being who he is, he says,
I am the world. I am the universe. I am God. I am truth. I am all. I am one. And I am also you.
While talking to the dwarf, he answers the same question in a very similar but notably different way.
One name you might have for me is the world. Or you might call me the universe. Or perhaps God. Or perhaps the truth. I am all, and I am one. So, of course, this also means that I am you.
When he talks to Ed, it's in a very matter-of-fact way. This is because he's trying to teach Ed about the way things are done. When he talks to Father, he speaks in a very wishy-washy manner. This is because Father already knew the answer, and educating him wouldn't do anything. Truth just asks him rhetorical questions to almost mock his foolishness. The dwarf has no respect for the truth. In fact, he actually despises it and is trying to become truth. Similar to Satan, the dwarf was a powerful and manipulative figure who seeks to become the ultimate being by obtaining the power of the universe and usurping God's natural order. In Christianity, this is known as pride. It's what made the devil and what made Adam and Eve eat the fruit. If you still don't think that this takes very deep Christian inspiration, the dwarf even asks Truth, "What's wrong with gaining knowledge? What's wrong with seeking perfection?" This is exactly what Adam and Eve were thinking as they ate the fruit. So what is wrong with gaining knowledge? The quest for knowledge isn't in and of itself bad, it's actually a good thing. The Bible speaks highly of people who are knowledgeable and wise in many parts of scripture. What I believe is most likely the case is that eating the fruit meant that they were able to choose for themselves what was right and what was wrong, instead of understanding that that power was only to be bestowed by God. Only God should be allowed to choose what is right and wrong. Although there are many interpretations to this issue. For the dwarf, he wanted to use that knowledge to subjugate everyone to his will and become God. Both of them are using knowledge to bad ends. What is wrong with seeking perfection? Well, it doesn't exist. That's why in Fullmetal Alchemist they say that we should rely on our friends. Father's idea of perfection was also quite off the mark. By perfection, he wanted omnipotency. But such a feat does not lie within his nature. He is not God. Perhaps if he had a more mimetic view of the world and understood his place situated within the flow of nature, attempting to attain perfection within that mold may have been fine. This is also why pride is the strongest of the 7 deadly sins in Fullmetal. Similarly, pride is seen as the worst of the 7 deadly sins in Catholicism. It is a sin after the devil and the dwarf's own heart, something that lies at the very core of their blackened hearts. Truth throws the dwarf into the gate. He's staying forever in his bubble of knowledge which he turned into God. Truth answers his arrogant desire to seek perfection by dragging him into the gate. In a sense, he's allowing him to reach his height of knowledge and perfection, but he's now trapped in an even smaller flask than he was originally. He's trapped with all the knowledge he could ever want, but is unable to act on it. He is in a hell of his own making, as described by CS Lewis.
Humans who would dare to play God must pay a steep price for their arrogance. That is the way of the universe, the natural order imposed by the very thing you claim to worship. That is true.
No! No! This despair is reserved for the boastful. You brought this outcome upon yourself. What did I do wrong? What should I have done?
Ed was a child who was looking for a way to get his loved one back. As a result, Truth just tries to teach him something. However, the dwarf is someone who persistently tried to become God. There was no pure intention, it was just selfishness and ego. There was no lesson to be taught, he was beyond help, but Ed was still able to be helped. At the end of the series, when Ed enters the gate more mature, he has learned his lesson, and Truth is overjoyed. When Ed returns to retrieve Al's body, he offers his ability to perform alchemy. In exchange, Truth then asks Ed if he's sure that he's alright being lowered to a simple human. Ed replies that that's all he's ever been, and if any problem arises, he'll just work with his friends to overcome it. He understands that not all problems can be fixed with alchemy. To this, Truth is elated and exclaims that he's done it, and he has the right answer. Truth then fades away while Ed relinquishes his ability to perform alchemy. When Ed acknowledges his folly belief that alchemy could solve all problems of the world, he is humbled to the idea of accepting the world as it is. Working through the world through its natural means is what it is to be a human. Ed has developed a mimetic view of the world. Ed probably saw Truth as someone who tormented him, but in reality, he was helping him. This is similar to how people believe God tortures his believers, but in reality, he ultimately helps them. It's short-term pain for substantial long-term gain. In the short term, you have to withstand the struggle and bear your cross. But in the long term, the burden becomes light and the yoke is made easy. Ed learned that there was nothing wrong with being human and being subject to the natural limitations concomitant to that fact. And he is praised for that fact. Perhaps by design, the Bible states in Matthew chapter 23 verse 12, "For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." Ed was eventually exalted, the dwarf was eventually humbled. The world does not bend to your will, and you shouldn't try and make it do that. For this reason, it is better to bend your will to the realities of this world. That is where ultimate fulfillment is found. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good." All things will go good for you if you align yourself with the truth. There is nothing wrong with who you are. There wasn't a mix-up in the celestial assembly line. There may be parts of you that you don't like and you may want to give up. You may even be willing to exchange an arm and a leg for it. Sometimes life is awful. Sometimes you wish you could just clap your hands together and change things to your liking. But that isn't how the world works. Truth in Fullmetal Alchemist isn't a one-to-one comparison with the Christian god, and the dwarf isn't a one-to-one comparison to Satan, but I do think that there are a lot of striking similarities between the four of them, and I thought it would be a great idea to highlight that in this video. I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from this story. I find Fullmetal Alchemist having a lot of similarities with the Christian understanding of truth, nature, and Satan. If you want to hear me talk more about God and Christianity, I actually wrote a book called Muscular Christianity, a case for spiritual and physical fitness. I'm aiming for a summer 2022 release, so stay tuned for that. With that being said, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll catch you all next time. Peace.